Dr. Spiegel, at our request, what have you reviewed in this case? And just go ahead and give me more
So
detail.
it's a lengthy review, but court filings, psychological testing that was done on Ms. Heard by both Dr. Hughes and Dr. Curry, other physicians' medical records, other physician note, Dr. Kipper, counselors and therapists that both parties and psychiatrists that they went to, text messages, depositions, snippets of the UK trial, and I'm sure pictures of physical injuries, so I've seen a lot.
What, if anything, have you seen in terms of emails, audios, videos?
Yes, so I've seen videos of Mr. Depp. I think the video was showing of Mr. Depp destroying, slamming cupboards and breaking glass and yelling at Ms. Heard while having a wine glass in his, with wine in his hands. I've seen videos of destruction of property in the house.
Okay. And what, if any, review have you conducted of the deposition and testimony of Mr. Depp's hired witness, Dr. Curry?
Objection.
Sure. Do you remember my question? Did you review the deposition and testimony of Dr. Curry?
Dr.
Curry.
Yes, I've reviewed Dr. Yes, I'm sorry.
And,
yes, so I've reviewed testimony of Dr. Curry. I've reviewed Dr. Curry's reports. I've reviewed Dr. Curry's testimony.
Okay, and what if did you review the deposition and trial testimony of Dr. Hughes?
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor, beyond the scope of the disclosure.
I'll allow that.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Did you interview Mr. Depp?
No, I did not.
Did you
But
request to
I
interview?
requested to interview Mr. Depp twice, and both times Mr. Depp and his lawyers refused.
Dr. Spiegel, I'm going to ask you some questions in this case respecting your opinions and the opinions you have formed and the bases for them. And I'm going to ask you to provide me with, in a reasonable degree of medical probability or certainty. Can you do that?
Yes.
Okay. On what were you requested to analyze and opine in this case?
So it's fourfold. One, I was asked to opine about the risk factors that are associated with intimate partner violence and behaviors that are shown, risk factors that are shown in intimate partner violence to be consistent with behaviors that Mr. Depp has demonstrated. Two, I've been asked to opine about the acute effects on alcohol and substance use, and I mentioned that including mood, behavior, cognition, functional impairment. Three, talking about the psychological profile, if you would, of, is there a question? I'm sorry. Oh,
no.
Okay. Of psychological and medical sequelae of patients who have suffered intimate partner violence and perpetrated intimate partner violence, and whether or not Mr. Depp's behavior is consistent with that. And lastly, about alcohol and other substance use disorders, their diagnostic criteria, their medical and psychological effects, psychiatric effects, their cognitive effects, and their functional effects. And I think I would like to just go with the jury one other thing. When we talk about, when psychiatry talks about substance use disorders, it's imperative to understand we're not talking about someone who rarely uses and happens to have a bad night. We're not talking about someone who uses on a weekly basis and has a bad night. We're talking about repetitive patterns of behavior that meet a list of 11 criteria that can be deemed mild, moderate, or severe. Because I think people get confused when they hear the word substance abuse, that they think of, oh, I may have used this because I used it twice. There is a whole criteria of behavior and sequelae and consequences that go with a substance use disorder. I'm not just talking about someone who will occasionally smoke a joint or smokes a joint or snorts occasionally coke, okay, or has alcohol on weekends. So I really need to reiterate that, because I think when you look at psychiatric behavior, we tend to people look online and say, my gosh, I have all 7 of these, right? And they're reading it not quite the way the psychiatric literature is supposed to go. So please, when I'm talking about this, I need you to understand, one, that's what's going on. As I told you about intimate partner violence, it's horrible that anyone would strike anyone, okay? But again, we're talking about repetitive behaviors for means of control. Right. So that's real important to understand when you're moving forward. And I may say occasionally substance abuse, but what I'm referring to is substance
Objection
use.
beyond the scope of the question.
I don't.
Sustained. Next question.
Okay. Dr. Spiegel, could you please just summarize for the jury the conclusions you came to with your opinions, and then we'll take you through the specifics.
So in my opinion, based on my review of the evidence, based on my clinical experience, based on my publishing experience, based on my teaching experience, that Mr. Depp has behaviors that are consistent with both someone who has a substance use disorder as well as consistent behaviors for someone who is a perpetrator of intimate partner violence.
Thank you. I'm going to start with the impact of drug and alcohol abuse over time. First of all, based upon your review of the record evidence, what type of drugs has Mr. Depp used?
So Mr. Depp, and I'm talking about use, we're talking about a substance use disorder here. We're not just talking about use, okay? So we are talking about alcohol, we are talking about amphetamines, we are talking about marijuana, we are talking about cocaine, we are talking about LSD, we are talking about ecstasy, we are talking about opiates, we are talking about prescription benzodiazepines, and we'll get into a separate thing about the abusability of Seroquel and or gabapentin and Iran. And we are talking about much of the time concurrent use, meaning simultaneously.
In your practice, do some patients suggest to you that drugs and alcohol actually help them?
So I think it's patients who lack insight or are in the very early stages of recognizing they have a quote-unquote problem will sometimes actually say that they have this medication actually calms me down, this medication makes me feel better. And in actuality, they may not acutely feel anything, but chronic and continual use will take its toll on the brain. So the answer is yes, but again, people who have substance use disorders have lack of insight and a lack of judgment about what's going on. They're very poor moderators of their own behavior.
Has Mr. Depp suggested, based on your review of the record evidence, that alcohol and drugs actually help him?
In review of the evidence, he has suggested that alcohol, Xanax, I'm in the list of medications, do help. Although I will also tell you on review of the evidence that there were at least 2 times I can remember that Mr. Depp was referring to at least short-lived periods of sobriety, and I cannot exactly tell you what that included, that both times he said that he functioned better and that he recognized that alcohol and drugs was at the root of his problems.
Now, there's been testimony that Mr. Depp is quite charming, both off and on the drugs and the alcohol. What is your answer to that?
So, again, let me put one thing clear here. I am not here to impeach Mr. Depp's acting skills or his persona. He has way greater skills than I do in that. What I'm here today is talk about how drugs and alcohol affect what we all have in common. We're all human beings. We can all only get so much, take so much when something is going to happen. And that's what I see every day in the emergency room, on the consult service, on inpatient psychiatry. Bad things happen, not because of anything special, except we're all human beings, and our brains, substance of abuse, are not titrated, they're not regulated by the FDA. We don't know what we're getting. We don't know how much we're getting. There is no control over what makes it to our brain. So it is not the actor. It is not the persona, okay? It is a person just like the rest of us who are human beings who will have these effects, and that's what we all share in common. Everyone in this courtroom shares that in common.
When Mr. Depp was in his relationship with Amber Heard, was he a polysubstance abuser?
Was he in what substance abuse?
Polysubstance
Yes.
abuser?
So
Can you explain
leaving your
what that is?
Overruled.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so polysubstance abuse is the use of 3 or more substances. And I answer, like I said, concurrently, he was. Even while I was getting ready for rehab on the island, he was. So, yes, he did engage in that.
Did Mr. Depp's drug and alcohol abuse affect him cognitively?
Yes. So, if nothing else to look at, Dr. Blaustein, psychiatrist that evaluated Mr. Depp, did a mini mental state exam on him. And as part of that mini mental state examination, you're asked to remember 3 words and then come back 5 minutes later and repeat those 3 words. And in the meanwhile, you're getting other types of testing for attention and concentration and visual, spatial, and language. So other things that are being tested too. Mr. Depp was unable to recall any of them, and that is very unusual for a 50-ish year old male. I don't remember how old he was when he took that. Generally speaking, that age group should be remembering 2 or all 3 of those words. One, I do know that his lines were also fed to him by earpiece. Again, affecting memory. I did see in video deposition about having to have questions, I don't want to say repeat as much as completely forgotten. So the answer is yes. And you know, any one of us who use alcohol and cocaine to that level of degree, and I'm talking about a severe level of substance use disorder, are going to have effects. It is inescapable because we all have brains that are malaffected by extensive substance use, and potentially sometimes less, but certainly what we're talking about here is extensive.
What, if anything, did you observe from the record evidence about Mr. Depp having difficulty focusing, his attention span, processing, whether he could function as an actor?
So,
Objection compound.
Compound is only if it's
Overruled.
Thank you.
so again, in terms of the acting part, we do know that he needed his lines fed to him for movies. Part of that could have been also due to, and I don't know which movie, and please forgive me about that, that he actually confessed he did a movie entirely wasted. So I imagine it would be harder to do that. Additionally, like I said, when I looked at deposition, you can tell that the processing speed was down. His thinking rate was down. If your thinking rate is down, and I'm not talking about, again, I'm getting older. I'm probably not as sharp as I was at 25, okay? But I'm talking about so slow that when we're trying to move on to other questions, we're still trying to answer the original data that's presented to us. So attention span is very much impaired. And if your attention span is impaired, your memory is going to be impaired. It is inescapable that that's going to happen. So all that comes into play there. And that's what I witnessed in the video deposition. Fortunately for Mr. Depp, I do see that during this trial, his cognition has improved somewhat, which will happen if you are sober. So I commend him on that. But again, I'm specifically referencing the time with Ms. Heard's and Mr. Depp's relationship. So we're talking about that.
What, if any, observations from the record evidence did you have about Mr. Depp having alcoholic blackouts or foggy mind?
Again, there were reported times where he would be essentially, quote unquote, passed out drunk. You saw pictures of him passed out drunk and not being able to remember what he did, which is, again, if you look at the record evidence, you will see that and this is linking intimate partner violence and substance uses together. I know we're going to get to that, which is basically if you have blackouts and you're using alcohol or using cocaine, it's going to be near impossible to remember what happened the night before. I don't think I'm the first person that's ever told you that alcohol can cause blackouts, and basically alcohol decreases a brain chemical, glutamate, which is involved in memory formation. If it blocks that to an extensive degree, the individual cannot remember what happened because they didn't have enough time for their brain to process the memory. You need this brain chemical. So does alcohol blackouts happen every time? No, of course not. But are they a complication of a use disorder? Absolutely yes. And there was record evidence of that.
Dr. Spiegel, you said at one point alcohol and cocaine. Is it possible to have blackouts with alcohol and different types of substances?
Yes. So my clinical experience, and I'll date it back within the last month, we had a patient who was using both, especially cocaine, and she had these kind of stroke-like lesions around the brain center known as the hippocampus, which is involved in memory formation. So
Objection, relevance.
Just giving an example.
Overruled.
Combining the two substances together increases the likelihood, even if you don't get what is a major stroke. And again, we think of a major stroke as someone who has speech difficulties and movement difficulties. There's a lot of different types of stroke that can just affect cognition. They don't necessarily have to have severe movement deficits or severe language deficits. They can solely affect you in terms of your cognitive symptoms, and actually known as a vascular neurocognitive disorder. So you need to understand, and that's part of the psychiatric diagnosis. You need to understand that you can